Have you ever driven somewhere where at night you're just so creeped out? Whether it's the vibe or just the place, the scenery itself, or the people? Your little pelitos stand up on your back of your neck and your arms and you just can't wait to get out of there. If you're new here, hi, I'm Crystal. This is Getting Spooky, where we talk about the creepy, weird, and obscure. I gathered up some of the creepiest stories about weird and spooky things that have happened to people on long trips through lonely roads, so you can think about them when you're driving down your own dark and lonely road. Many, many years ago, I was on what is called a meet and turn. This is where a driver that's domiciled on one city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while the other domiciled out to a different destination. They'll drive halfway with that load that is destined for my city. We'll meet in the parking lot, switch trailers, and drive back home. I've been on this run for a few months, and I found out that I always got to the meet point about an hour before the other driver. It was a dark and empty dirt lot about 3 a.m., so I would stretch out across the seat and take a short nap. One night, at about 10 minutes into my nap, I was awoken by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but it carried on for several minutes. Soon, it became apparent that the dog was right outside my truck, barking at me. Okay, either the dog is Lassie and it's trying to alert me of something, or else this is just a pain in the ass, and I'll need to throw something at him to scare him off. It's just important to note that the barking had been going on for a good 10 minutes at this point. So, I sat up and looked out my window. Standing there, mere inches from the other side of the glass, was a man about 35. He was a large fellow, and he was barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was frothing at the mouth a little. The scene really held my full attention for a moment. The sheer creepiness of this struck me. Gently, and making an absolute minimum of sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck, and slowly pulled away. He chased me, much like you might expect an angry dog to do, barking all the while. Needless to say, it played hell with my power naps from that point on. My mother was driving in Arizona when she saw what she thought was leaves blowing across the road in the distance. This puzzled her since there was mostly pine trees in northern Arizona. When she finally got to the leaves, she realized that they were actually migrating tarantulas, thousands of them. There were so many of them that her truck was sliding on their guts, so she had to slow down. She stopped at the first truck stop and told the co-driver to fuel up. He was sleeping at the time, because she wasn't going to step foot outside actually. Her co-driver was pissed since it was technically his time off, and he thought that she was crazy until he saw the tarantula guts and legs caked inside the wheel well of the truck. My aunt and I were on a road trip to visit my grandparents. We were driving almost 3,000 miles to the Northwest Territories of Canada from Portland, Oregon. Most of the drive is long and lonely highways. I decided it would be a good idea to bring along an Unsolved Mysteries book to pass the time, because reading about murder is always a good road trip fun. We stopped at a campground just to sleep in the van. I was sleeping in the front passenger seat. I thought what I heard was footsteps close to the van, but I didn't see anything. When I woke up the next morning, I glanced out the window, and there was a full face print on the window, like someone had been watching us during the night. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for the rest of the drive. When I was younger, each summer, and almost every New Year, my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. in order to reach our destination the next morning. So, around 2 a.m., we crossed into Mexico, and that's when things got weird. When you're the only one on the stretch of the highway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of the cacti. We'd been in Mexico for about an hour and still had a few more to drive, and I remember sleeping but being semi-conscious of what was going on around me because I didn't have the skill to really fall asleep in a car. So, when my mother suddenly spoke to my dad saying, "Hey Miguel, that car behind us, it's been behind us since we left Laredo," My dad peeked at the car and shrugged it off, saying that a lot of cars use this road, that they were probably going to another city. He had left it at that despite my mom keeping a wary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper aware of the car also, and we entertained ourselves by watching it through the gaps in the luggage that blocked the rear windows. We got tired of that pretty quick, and then we heard our mother say he was getting closer. We turned to watch as the car inched closer and closer to ours. He was getting closer, she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car, and on a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, with another few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My father didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove. And the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more. Like he knew it was freaking us out and he was enjoying it. It was during one of these periods that the car had pulled away. My mom spotted a police car up ahead, parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. Pull over, right in front of the police. And my dad did. I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park our car right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked what was wrong with my mother, and she urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed us, and how it taunted us. The police took our claim seriously and told us how people were victimized and how they had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals. And then he offered to drive behind us for a while just to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us, relieved. Until about 10 minutes later, when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. 10 minutes later, we saw the car pulled over on the side of the road, waiting. I'll never know what would have happened to me if I had gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car to be closer to them. Somehow, I don't want to think that it would have been good. Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all 2-lane roads and through total nothingness except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town, nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also, at that time, a hotspot for satanic group activity. I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign just to prove that I had been there, to friends who dared me to take a route. I got back in the car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I'm driving through nearly a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see some stuff in the middle of the street. As I approach, I slow down and I see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and 2 bodies laying face down on the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seems very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something just was wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. It was a horror movie, as I said. I scanned the road and I saw a line I could drive. Past the guy in the road and his left, swerve to the right side of the woman behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped into first gear, punched it, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or any of the bodies, and I continued forward a couple 100 feet and I slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow. As I looked up in the rearview mirror, I saw that the 2 bodies had gotten up to their knees, and 20 or so people had emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and didn't let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 east on-ramp. Back in the early mid-1970s, My mother and I lived in the Pacific Northwest. I was about 6 years old. We were on an offbeat road right out of Seattle. It was a very dark night, no moon, and a wisp of fog. We saw a Volkswagen Beetle on the side of the road with its emergency flashers on, and a rather good-looking guy, as my mom describes him, with his arm in a sling waving us down. My mom pulled over, being the kind woman that would help anybody in need, and he looked normal. My mom rolled down her window and asked if she could help, and the guy asked my mom if she could help him get the last lug nut off his tire so she could change his flat. My mother introduced herself, and he said, "Hello, my name is Ted," and then smiled, looked at me, reached over and shook my hand. He asked my name, and I think I got the bad vibe as well because I said nothing to him. My mom said something about his smile really made her uncomfortable, and then she noticed that he was missing a passenger seat in his Beetle, so she rolled the window back up and said that she would call a tow truck to help him at the next city. She then speeds away while looking in her rearview mirror as she sees him taking off the sling and gets back into the Beetle, taking off very fast in the opposite direction. So, that's the night at 6 years old when I shook the hand of Ted Bundy. And there you have it. If you like these sort of videos or just scary story narrations in general, head over to my Patreon where you'll get access to over 120 vintage spooky creepypasta narrations. Just $1 to hear Baby Spooky. I listened to it the other day and it was really weird. It was like, who even is that person? With that being said, I'm Crystal. This is Getting Spooky, and I'm out.